the US could, and the new administration could bring something new in the Middle East. The question is, can it? And that's the question. My view is basically that the new administration in Washington is in fact old wine in new bottle, because we have basically the issue of Iran, the issue of Israel, Palestinians. All that has not really changed. And we can see that the support to Israel has remained the same. I'm not exactly sure what prompted the US to intervene in against the Ansar Allah in Yemen, but obviously it is in favor of Israel. Um, and we even see that in other conflicts. I mean, the conflict against Iran, definitely. It may take a more softer stance, in the sense that, as we have said many times, I think the Trump was elected with a program of restoring the industrial power of the US. And that's his focus. And to achieve that, has a secondary objective, an enabling objective, if you want, is to keep China down. That's so. Main objective is to restore U.S. power, economic power, credibility, economic, financial, industrial capability, credibility, and to achieve that, it has to have some secondary focuses. I mean, obviously China and others, because the US has clearly said they want to oppose EU, even, which is the closest ally. And when I say EU, it's because it's the economic side, but we could talk about NATO, because Canada is part of NATO, and Denmark with Greenland is part of NATO. And so Trump is ready to antagonize even its allies, its European allies. So the focus is clear. And to achieve its objectives, Trump tries to discard all the disturbances that he has. The main one being the Ukrainian conflict, because it distracts a lot of resources, a lot of energy, a lot of financial, military capabilities, and all that. Therefore, he wants to get rid of that. It's not because he likes peace. It's because it sees that it's something that brings absolutely no return on investment, and therefore there's no need to continue investing in that project. That's the thing. And I think the view towards the Palestine conflict is almost the same. It's slightly different because there are also vested interests from people within the United States, including people who are in fact supporters of the Trump administration. And therefore, the Trump administration approach towards Palestine and Israel is biased in a certain sense, and will be biased in favor of Israel. So that appears clearly. Now, when we talk about Yemen, we have to remember that Yemen and Ansar Allah, who decided to impose an embargo against Israel, is not a country that has some conflict or issues with Israel per se. The purpose of the Yemeni attacks in the Red Sea, which, by the way, are directed towards the shipping that is related to Israel in the Eilat port on the Red Sea. This is the objective of the technical or physical objective of the Yemeni. And why do they do that? It's because, in fact, Yemen is implementing the a UN principle, which is the responsibility to protect. And the purpose of this action against the shipping and the embargo itself is to press Israel to accept a ceasefire. I mean, a ceasefire, a long a ceasefire in Gaza. And as the ceasefire was announced last year, in November last year, and started to be implemented, then the Yemenis stopped firing and stopped their firing against the shipping and the embargo, because that was the purpose, to force the Israelis to accept the ceasefire. So it's not an all-out war against shipping in the Red Sea and trying to disrupt, let's say, European or Western supply routes and things like this. It has nothing to do with that. It's specifically targeted, and we see it's very interesting because and that was very noted last year, by the way, that the Yemeni were able to identify those ships who are directed towards Eilat, I mean the Israel, and they know exactly that, so they can check the transponder of the ships and target the ships accordingly. That's the reason why a lot of ships, by the way, by especially those who are bound to Eilat and Israel, they turn off their transponder to make the things more complicated for the Yemeni. But I mean, the Yemeni have a very targeted approach. It's not something which is totally indiscriminate, as we tend to see in our media. So that's very important. On the other hand, I can understand or have some understanding for the Americans that want to keep those line of communication secure, and I understand that. But myself, I'm not so in favor of these unilateral embargoes and unilateral measures, including the enforcement of that. But we have to realize that what the Yemenis are doing is in fact exactly the same as what the Americans are doing in other areas, where they impose embargo and they enforce embargo with the US Navy. So that's exactly the same thing. Personally, I think it should not be an accepted practice that is valid for the Yemenis as for the Americans. The problem is that the West has started with this kind of policies, and now we have other actors who are taking exactly the same attitude and the same strategies as the Western powers. So that's somehow or disregard for international law tends to backfire on us, and that's a case in point for the Yemenis. So I can understand the reaction of the Americans. The problem is that, in my view, if Trump would have a different approach to the problem, they would probably first make sure that the Israelis implement the ceasefire as it was signed. Because so far we have seen that the Israelis have never, I underline twice, they have never implemented agreements as they were signed. And we have another example right now. This is the ceasefire that was agreed upon sorry, I said before November. November was the ceasefire in Lebanon, in South Lebanon, which is not respected by Israel either. And in Palestine, it came in January. Sorry, mixed up things. But in any case, this is the same thing. The Israelis have never respected a ceasefire. And by the way, that's exactly what has prompted the creation and the success of Hamas. Because as opposed to the Palestinian Authority, who accepted those breach of ceasefires repeatedly, the Hamas said, no, we are not accepting that anymore. And we will react on this. And as I've probably said on your channel already, when we talk about Hamas and we talk about those the firing rockets and things like this, I made a specific research on that, and I noticed that because I tried to explain what was the criteria for Hamas to shoot or to fire those rockets, especially because those rockets, if you look at even at Israeli statistics, those rockets don't provoke a lot of victims. I mean, the number of victims is minimal. In years, this is probably 10. I mean, there are probably some wounded, but death is minimal. There's probably 10 or 12 or in 10 years. So it's very minimal. So what is the criteria? And I have observed that the Palestinians fired the rockets after the Israelis breach or broke a ceasefire. And now it's interesting to understand the logic or the rationale for the Israelis. Because when the Israelis sign or agree on a ceasefire with the Palestinians, they consider that striking against an official of Hamas or some Palestinian leader or things like that, they don't consider that as a breach of the ceasefire.